Thank you. Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Development Committee, 25th of January 2024. I'm Councillor Paul Heinrich. I'm chairing this meeting this morning. Those who haven't been here before, the members of the committee are those seated in the arc in front of me. Public speakers seated on the right. Local member is also on the right. Usually, we learnt the place from yesterday. And officers are either side of me. Could I ask officers to introduce themselves, please?
Thank you, Russell. I'm Graham Connolly, Housing Strategy and Delivery Manager.
I'm Russell Williams. I'm the Assistant Director for Planning and also the Case Officer for this morning.
Morning. I'm Alison Hutchinson. I'm a planning consultant that has been dealing with the planning application for most of its duration.
Lauren Gregory, Durham Catholic Services.
Good morning, Jeff Lyon, Development Manager.
Ben Jervis, Senior Landscape Officer specialising in ecology.
Fiona Croxton, Solicitor to the Council.
Thank you. Usual housekeeping notes. Could you turn your phones to silent, please, or off? There are no fire alarms planned. So if the alarm does sound, please leave by the exits and use the stairs only to assemble either in the front car park or by the flagpole on the other side of the building. We are going to take a break. I should, rather than our usual 11 o'clock or so, I will take the break after we've had the presentation of public speakers. That we've estimated to take around an hour anyway. I do not wish to break the flow of debate by taking a break halfway through. Just advise members of the public that they shouldn't speak to members of the committee during the meeting or during the break itself. At the break, please remember that the examination local plan is going on in the committee room, so please keep quiet in the lobby and corridor as far as possible. Thank you. Apologies, please, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies that absence have been received from Councillors John Toy and Councillor Kim Toy. If I may, with the second item, Chairman, substitutes Councillor Luke Patterson for Councillor John Toy and Councillor Liz Whittington for Councillor Kim Toy.
Thank you. Item 4 is minutes of the 11th January. Because of the short timescale since that meeting, these will be presented at the first meeting in February. Are there any items of urgent business?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. The order of business is clearly as detailed on the agenda, there only being one item. Could I ask for declarations of interest, please? I will declare one personally, one pecuniary, but I need to advise the committee that I have had considerable email contact with one of the leading objectors ever since the application went in. I have provided only advice on the planning process. I have not at any time given any opinion on the application itself. I therefore do not consider myself predetermined anyway. Thank you. Anybody else? Andy?
Yeah, I've been lobbied, Mr. Chairman, and I have just acknowledged receipt of the email.
Yeah, I think that would apply to all of us. There's been considerable lobbying, and we have attempted to make sure that every important document from objectors has been put on in the public on the website. Should I say planning portal, be more correct? Anybody else who should make any declaration? Okay, we move to the officers' reports. This will be a two-parter with Mr. Williams and Mrs. Hutchinson presenting different parts of this report. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So just to recap, I'm Russell Williams. I'm effectively the case officer internally for this application, now have been so for the last 4 to 6 months, and I'm very much supported here by Mrs. Hutchinson, who will do the middle third, for want of a better phrase, of the presentation this morning. And as you probably picked up from the introductions at the start, we have a number of other officers covering a couple of specialisms today who may chip in as appropriate to respond to comments during the debate part of the meeting. I'm expecting between Mrs Hutchinson and I, we will take around half an hour to run through the presentation. So apologies if you end up hearing too much of my voice, but the application is PF/22/1784 before us today, and effectively a three-part application. Firstly, a full planning application for 343 dwellings. Secondly, an outline planning application for 7 service self-build plots. And thirdly, another outline planning application for an elderly care facility, the detail of that being up to 66 beds. The site in question is to the southwest of North Walsham, and we'll come into more detail about this in due course. The red line is on the next drawing. There's a relatively extensive plot. The station is just up by the left-hand edge of the green bar you can see at top. Now, to summarise the application in a little bit more detail, next line, please. It's been with us for a while. Okay, so since 2022, I've already covered the top 3 points there. It also includes effectively a new link road connecting Hornbeam Road to the east of the site, predominantly developed by Hopkins a few years ago, with Ewing Road to the west of the site, predominantly developed by Persimmon, and therefore will create a link that connects 2 different bits of Norwich Road by using Hornbeam, Ewing, and this new connecting point. And again, we will explain this in a bit more detail as we go through. Some of the site, about half of it, the northern half, has been in the development plan as adopted since 2011, and the bottom half is in the draft plan currently subject to examination, as the chair has said. And this is 1 or 2 applications. Technically, there is a duplicate, i.e. identical application still with the council that we will have to deal with at some point in the future. I'm not anticipating coming back and repeating this in 2 weeks' time, I promise, in that regard, or the applicants might decide to withdraw it in due course. As I'm sure you've noted from reading the report, we do have a caveated recommendation for approval, which I'll come back to at the end, including an extensive list of Section 106 contributions, which we will also refer to at the end. And I'll talk through some highlights of the consultation that we've undertaken and provide updates on the 3 or 4 areas that are set out in the report as requiring updates as we go through the presentation. But as is normally the case, we'll start with some photographs. So whether pleased or not, you're going to get sort of 5 sets of photographs here rather than thousands of photographs in a logic that kind of suited me. So firstly, the Persimmon site. Ewing Road, junction with Norwich Road on the top left. The link road would go through the continuation of that road on the top right-hand side of the picture where those 4 or 5 cars are parked. And then there would be a separate emergency access and footpath link created through the bottom picture, which is a sort of side road within that development. If we then move across round slightly into town along Norwich Road, it's the next set of photographs, at the existing access to North Walsham Garden Centre there, Nursery Drive, the picture on the left showing the access into it, the picture on the right showing the access out of it. In due course, that road would only effectively serve the residential houses on that street, and the garden centre would switch to be accessed off the new link road, but we will come back to that as we talk it through. And personal view, it's not the greatest access point at the moment, so there is an advantage of it disappearing effectively from generally wider network use other than the houses. Next one. Next one is predominantly the Hopkins scheme, Hornbeam Road on the top left-hand corner. The central picture is the continuation of Hornbeam Road where the link road would go through from, and that's sort of always been envisaged in the picture. And the other pictures in the bottom half are to left and right are a view from Smedley Close, bottom right across open space as part of the Hopkins scheme, bottom left view of the site into the distance. Next, please. And then a couple of pictures of the field. So the southern half of the site is a reasonably extensive field system. And as you will have picked up, much of the local interest has been on the central area. So we've got a few pictures of that next, showing the sort of Leylandii fir trees that are not the only ones there, but significant number, and then the central scrubby area in the bottom component of the pictures. And I thought it might be helpful to talk through some images as to how it's changed over the years. So the next 4 or 5 are aerial photographs. This one for most people, if not everybody in the room, was born, but 75 years ago, basically farmland, agricultural fields. Okay. Switching forward another 42 years, we've got the, and I've mainly focused these on the central part, but the start of the garden centre activity to the centre of this site, but clearly neither the Persimmon development, bottom left, or the Hopkins development, top right, have started at this point in time. Next. 2007, little bit more defined area. Their garden centre, the central section is just south of the garden centre, and Mrs. Hutchinson will talk about that in more detail, but you can see the start of some sort of hedge type features there and some individual trees. Next. And then 2020, so a couple of years back, you've got the Persimmon development bottom left, now in play, and the Hopkins development top right. And again, still the garden centre with the area which we might focus on just to the south of the garden centre, and then clearly the agricultural fields to the south of that. Next, please. So just in terms of some basics, so the site was countryside in the 2008 development plan. For those that need their sort of history lesson, I suppose, of planning, we produced a policy-based document, which was the 2008 adopted core strategy, and then 3 years later adopted some site allocations within the same sort of process. And the northern half of the site was proposed and agreed for development in the 2011 adopted local plan. And I'll show the area in a second. It's also, in as much of the district is, safeguarding area in the minerals plan, and the rest of the site was then allocated for development in the draft local plan over the last few years, which, as I've already said, is being examined now. And there are a couple of tree preservation orders that relate to the site, which Mrs. Hutchinson will show and comment on later. And we did formally advertise it as a departure to the development plan, effectively because of the bottom half of the site rather than the top half of the site. Next, please, Lauren. So this is the allocated plan. The garden centre is effectively under the bit that says NW01, coincidentally. The bottom left chunk is the Persimmon development predominantly, and the top right chunk is predominantly the existing Hopkins development. So it is only the central third, for want of a better phrase, of that 2011 adopted plan that hasn't yet been developed and which is part of this application. Whereas the draft plan, which is the next one, effectively excludes the 2 areas that have been developed, Persimmon on the left, Hopkins on the right, and includes all the remaining part of the site and the new part, which again is NW01/B, I think it is, to south. Next, please, Lauren. So the report refers to 4 areas of update, if I were to simplify it: flooding, noise, and natural England are the 3 I'm commenting on here. I'll come back to education within comments on the section 106 element later in the presentation. So since the report has been issued, I'll do these in reverse order. A fair bit of information has come in from the applicant, has gone out to the consultees, and Natural England are now content with the position. So they are not objecting to the proposal, and that will tweak the recommendation when I get to it at the end, which is at paragraph 361. The lead local flood authority, LLFA, alternatively known as the County Council, have narrowed down their objection now to two issues. There was a longer list, probably this time last week, but it's now down to two issues. The applicant, as it says here, has submitted further information on those two issues, which has gone off to the LLFA for their comments. And again, that remains outstanding, as does noise, but I will come back to those within the recommendation component at the end. Next, please. So the representations are summarised at some length, paragraphs 182 and 183 of your report, 63, I think it is, of which the vast majority are objecting to this proposal. And next, clearly, I might not know everything that has been sent around in the last week, but I am aware of three components that I believe have all been drawn attention to all councillors' perspectives. So one, a letter from a resident of Smedley Close. Secondly, copy of link to a petition from the same resident, I believe. And thirdly, a submission from the applicant in the last few days. None, to be honest, have changed the perspective of officers on the application, but important that you're aware of all three. Next, please, line. So the report sets out an array of issues, as you know, in that regard. And Mrs. Hutchinson and I are just going to concentrate on four of them, the red four. As it happens, I'm going to do the first one and the last one, and she's going to do the middle two. Clearly, more than happy to talk about the rest, and some iterate into design and some iterate into the section 106 discussion in any event. But just firstly, in principle of development matters, before I hand over to Mrs. Hutchinson. Next one, please. Two quick slides. So going back to basics, the relevant planning rules, my summary, I appreciate. Follow the development plan unless material considerations lead you otherwise. So effectively, development plan says northern half fine, in principle, subject to the details, and southern half is in the draft plan, which is a material consideration. Doesn't have full weight, but is a material consideration. The proposal does enable the link between Hornbeam and Ewing Road, and it does deliver, I'll come back to this as we go through the rest of it and the conclusions, both significant amount of housing and appropriate infrastructure. And then my final slide for the moment, principle of development. As you all know, this council doesn't currently have a 5-year housing supply. That moves us into the domain of national planning policy framework and requisite paragraphs of that, which sort of tilts the balance a bit more towards approving such positions. And at the moment, bearing in mind this development has been proposed and known about for a while, at least the northern half, our 5-year supply figure assumes some of this development will happen. So if it weren't to happen, our 5-year position would actually get worse than we currently stated. As if it were to happen, our 5-year position would get better, because this will give us confidence that more will happen in the next 5 years than currently we predict. So currently we're predicting 120 within our 5-year land supply. We think that this would develop about 200 in the next 5 years of the 343 plus the care home facility. So we do believe that position helps negate any negative perspective on the principle associated with the southern half of the development. So that is all I'm going to cover. I will return once Mrs Hutchinson has covered design and then ecology and biodiversity. But
Thank you. Right. I'm going to go through a series of plans from the development just to sort of give you an outline of the components of the scheme, etc. The first one is basically the massing plan. So within that, and it's very difficult to show, so I'm going to use the I'm slightly cack-handed here, but I'm going to show the yes. Can you see my cursor there? Right, so effectively this is the whole scheme and all the housing that is to be developed. Within it, you'll see this area here, which is the garden centre, that is to be retained and will continue as its current operation. Over to the west side, we've got Ladbrokes Engineering, which is also unaffected by the development. It has its own access, so it doesn't really, it's so totally separate. Within the scheme itself, we've got this shows effectively the massing of the housing. So within this top corner here is where we've got, you can't see it, but it's shaded yellow. These are the single story properties, basically to take account of the fact that we've got some very short boundaries with the properties on Norwich Road. And then of course we've got a mix of properties. Some are sort of single, some are 1.5 and 2 stories along Nursery Drive. So that is where the single story properties are. The rest are effectively all 2 story. And within that, there are about 18 purple ones. I can pick one out there, some down here. Those are 2.5 stories. So that would be sort of where the way it's all laid out. Within the scheme itself, this is the area set aside for the care home. And here we have the self-build plots just to the south of that. So here we have the link road that is the required component. And then obviously we go south into the main area of the development and the northern one up into this area. We can show it in more detail probably in the next plan if we could go next. So this is the layout for the northern section effectively. You'll see here's the main road, the link road that comes in between Hornbeam Road and Ewing Road. The access to the northern one goes alongside Ladbrokes Engineering and cuts into part of what was formerly the garden centre. And then it splits off and with 2 cul-de-sacs to serve this northern development. So within this development also, this part of it, we've got allotments on the northern side of the link road. And this area here is a public orchard. So part of the, I suppose, part of the allotment infrastructure, if you like. Next. Going down to the southern area, we've got this, yeah, right, I'll show, it's easier to look on this one, isn't it? Right, if you look at this line here, this effectively is the southern boundary of the allocated site. This is the hedge line. And we're looking at this area to the north here is the area that was part and parcel of the garden centre, but has become overgrown. So the access road to the south comes through, is the main one, comes through here. We have the main area of public open space, which is this area, which is part of that central scrub woodland area. You can see there are some retained trees. Those I'll point to these later on. These are silver birch. This is the hedge line, which is to be retained, and obviously either side of that is going to be public open space. Here's the care home, which we don't have the details of as yet, as that is in outline together with the area for the self-build. So within the open space, we have here the leap. And then there is a lap here. We have 3 laps altogether. One is here. One is within the centre here, which in the small open areas, and the other one is here. So on the western side, along this boundary, which is the field boundary, and you can see the Persimmon development just there. These are designed for open space and the SUDs, the main area of SUDs for the development. You can see the contouring of the land to provide for the SUDs. And then obviously the sort of hedge line, the existing hedge line, and then we have the railway line along this side, which obviously throws up some sort of issues with amenity and everything for residential properties that are along this side. So in terms of sort of the overall design, we have a footpath that goes around the side, all around this area of the site. That has recently been sort of expanded, shall we say, to be able to provide for the walking that the Natural England require. In the overall design, I think we pointed out in the report that the lines are fairly straight. A lot of the roads are straight. We have quite uniform building lines, which we have pointed out in several times. The landscaping isn't so clear on this because it's very difficult. And this is the master plan. This is the landscape master plan. But we do still have concerns, and it will need to be fairly carefully conditioned in terms of how the landscaping is provided and comes forward and maintained. So there's a lot of hedging, the clipped hedging reliance, which is, I point something out, it's often in sort of little areas like this alongside of properties, etc. So it does beg the question whether they will be maintained properly. We can move on to the next one. In terms of the design of the houses, these are street scenes of 3 of the road. This one is along the main link road, so it's along this section here, and probably what we would consider to be one of the primary sort of areas of the site in terms of design terms. The second one is for adjacent to the building lines, so this area in this location. And then the third scene that you can see there is coming down, facing over towards the western boundary of the site. As I said, the houses are fairly standard. There are details within them that have been introduced, like along here, you can see a bit of coin detail. Some of them have got render, which has been now a bit wrapped around other sort of other elevations. But generally, this sets the tone of the development itself. Next one. So we know, and we have looked at an awful lot of the details with this central area, bearing in mind that there have been so many objections to its loss. The tree preservation order, there are 2 trees preservation order. One simply goes down this area, which is this one here, which is Nursery Drive. Those are largely unaffected. So the second one, which was done in 1921, 2021, 2022, is a blanket, what we call a blanket TPO. It doesn't identify any single tree whatsoever. It simply is a group of trees. So clearly it can only relate to trees and not to the scrub and everything other areas that we know are there. So that is a central area that we're looking at. If we go to the next slide, this one, sorry, is a bit difficult to see, but this is the tree survey. So what it shows, and I think it highlights it a little bit that the aerial photograph showed, is that these very strong lines through here, which are hedges, they're effectively Leylandi. So those were obviously built, they started to build up during those 1980, I can't remember the years, but we saw them on the aerial photographs, but they are recent. The tree survey itself reckons that most of them of this thing, these sort of vegetation in this area is 10 years old. So those are clear features. There is a group along here that is tree species as opposed to the Leylandi. And then within this area here are silver birch, which we will see on other plans. Here, this is the hedge line that forms the boundary of the northern site and the allocated site. So that was always there. And then obviously these are the field boundaries, and it highlights where trees are generally in the area. So if we can move. So dealing with this central area and the loss of trees that people are obviously quite concerned about, we have this site was the original detail. This was, here we have the silver birch that I pointed out, and here's the hedge line. This was the orchard, the public orchard originally. So that was going to take up space within that area. That has been relocated to the link road, as I showed you. And this second plan here shows the vegetation that is to be retained. Now, most of that is probably scrub. There are no specific trees as such that are identified. You can see the silver birch, and the trees, most of the trees that are visible, that are large and dominate the area, are within the hedge line. There are none really within this sort of central area in that way. The only trees that are in there are sort of overgrown Leylandi, I think, as far as I can see, and some self-setting trees. But I'm sure if Mr. Jarvis can sort of explain if that's different. Oh, wasn't me with it. So the area then we're talking about here is public open space, which is the main public open space for the site. And just, I think probably move on to the next one. So in terms of overall ecology and biodiversity, there have been extensive surveys done. We've had two badger surveys, bat surveys, reptile surveys, etc., and breeding birds as well. What those surveys identify is that this area, while it is used for wildlife, it's not the key area of the site. The badgers are there, but as we've pointed out in the report, they are transitional. They don't seem to be there all the time, and it may well be that they're because of disturbance or whatever, that they may not be there. They may come back, they may not. We just don't know. The main areas of biodiversity for the site remain these outside hedge lines. This is where the bats have been found. This is where the slow worms have been found. And obviously in this southern area, which is the agricultural land, is where the skylarks have been found. So from a biodiversity point of view, the proposals which actually provide more landscaped areas and open space around the periphery are the areas which will actually improve the biodiversity of the site. And I think that even if this area was retained, the chances of such animals as badgers being kept there are fairly limited. There is even going to be, they're going to be isolated by development on either side. So there have been extensive surveys. The council's own officers accept what the surveys have said, that there is biodiversity, but it's of local interest. And therefore, by providing a development around the edge, which has green space, and provided that the planting is designed acceptably, then that should enhance the biodiversity of the site to a greater extent. I think that's probably all I have to say.
So back to me for a couple of bits and then to conclude. So switching to effectively the Section 106 package that has been discussed. This table provides hopefully a useful summary. Your report from paragraphs 338 onwards goes into it in significantly more detail, but I'm just going to talk predominantly about education and affordable housing for the next minute or two, because in simple parlance, all the other asks have been reviewed, are considered appropriate, and the applicant is prepared to meet them. Brian, can we move to the next one? So Over time, and as I've already said, we've had this application for some time, some of the numbers, some of the asks have changed and evolved. The principal one that has caused, let's just call it a degree of contention of late, is the ask from the County Council in relation to education. As I said at the start, we've undertaken 3 rounds of consultation. The first 2 rounds, the County Council from an education perspective didn't seek a contribution, acknowledged there was capacity in the system at that point in time. The 3rd round towards the tail of last year sought a contribution for 2 different components, one related to special educational needs, and I'm rounding the numbers here, but of £250,000 pounds. Having looked at that, discussed it with the applicant, the view is that that makes sense and should be funded and should be part of the package. There's a second ask, which is in the report, of about £1.25 million for primary capacity, which the applicant has challenged. The County Council has endeavoured to justify, and the detail of that is set out in Appendix 1 of the report for you to see. But your officer's conclusion is it is very difficult to see how that is justified, particularly in the context of the history of round 1 and round 2. So the primary school provision in North Walsham has not changed. The buildings are the same. The predominant reason for the ask now is a different way of calculating the capacity of those schools. So, and I can't remember the exact figures now, but broadly speaking, originally they had a capacity of, say, 400. It's now calculated that the capacity is 300, despite the same building. And I have made up those 2 numbers. Okay, and that's moved the goalposts as to whether an ask has been sought or not. We struggle to see how that can be justified at this point in time. But again, as I've said, you've got further information in Appendix 1, which then brings me on to affordable housing. So as you know, our adopted policy position is basically 45% unless viability indicates a different proportion. I won't go into the draft plan because actually it's not particularly relevant for this point and rather confuses the issue. But the applicant has produced a viability assessment that concludes that 15% is deemed viable on this site. Our independent assessor has reviewed that as set out in the report, and Mr. Connolly can comment on this further if you wish during the discussion part of this session, and has concluded that that makes sense, that that is all that appears to be justifiable based on the quantum of Section 106 package that I illustrated on the previous slide. Equally, things change over time. Some figures might go up, some figures might go down. If I was being very flippant, the exact cost of the development, the one number you can guarantee it won't be in 3 years' time, is the exact number that's predicted today, because things change. So we are comfortable with 15%, providing there is kind of an uplift clause if the developer were to make a greater profit than envisaged within the viability assessment. So we are happy to recommend that to you. There is then a link between the education position and the affordable position. So broadly speaking, if you were to conclude that the provision of primary at 1.25 million is essential and has to come first, effectively, and should be provided, then that would have a significant consequential impact on the affordable housing percentage and reduce it. Haven't done the calcs in detail, but probably to nearer 5% than 10% in that regard. And some of the figures are set out in your report. So your officers are recommending the list. You can just go back to it, Emma, on the previous slide, is the Section 106 package. Arguably, that table provides a nicer summary than I've written slightly lengthily over 2 or 3 pages in the report. Go forward to them. I'm sorry. Thank you. So just conclusions before just setting out the recommendations. Already acknowledged it's a sort of partial departure from the development plan, part in, part out, the draft. And there are an array of positive considerations in support of approval here. The fact the rest of the site is in the draft plan is relevant. The fact we're struggling on the 5-year land supply issue is relevant. The fact it provides a good range of Section 106 contributions and the link road between A and B is relevant. So we believe a positive recommendation is justified. So if we come to the recommendation, just to summarise, one slight change to the report here. So the recommendation as currently written, I think it's on paragraph 361, is caveated to no objection from 3 different organisations effectively. As I said at the start, Natural England are now content. So I'm suggesting we take Natural England off that list. But, and I'm not anticipating this to be the case, but if either the lead local flood authority or our own in-house team associated with noise were to maintain and sustain an objection, if you were to go with the recommendation today, we wouldn't be able to issue that decision. So we'd only be able to issue a positive decision if those 2 confirm there is no objection, which is what I'm expecting to happen, but hasn't happened yet. So if, for sake of argument, the LLFA retains their objection, even if you go with the recommendation today, we'd have to come back and talk about the LLFA point at some point in the future. So I'm not asking for a blank bit of paper authority in this case. It's caveated on those 2 things. Next slide. Caveated then on the prior agreement of the Section 106 contribution. That might be in a slightly different order, but it's the same list that you've previously seen. Next. A whole load of conditions, which are sort of summarised in headline terms on certainly pages 59 and 60, depending on which version you look at. That will be the smaller 59 and 60 rather than the larger one, because there's 2 numbers on some. And we would look to make a new tree preservation order that relates to the whole site, and as a consequence of that, revoke the other 2. So continuing to protect the trees that would be retained, removing effectively the area blanket one that Mrs. Hutchinson referred to, but identifying the specific individual retained trees within there. And then finally, I think if I remember correctly, the summary. Caveated approval based on all those bits and pieces, an expectation that we will get to the outcome within a prescribed timetable as set out in the report, with all the final wording to be agreed by Mr. Fulcher as my line manager. Chair, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, very thorough. We now move to public speakers. We start with the Town Council speaker, Mr. Bob Wright. Comes to the microphone. We have 3 minutes, which Lauren will be timing. Thank you. Well, North Walsham Town Council recognises most of this site is designated for residential use in the draft local plan, which we broadly support. But we do have concerns on 2 issues, the green area that's been spoken about and traffic issues. Many residents have expressed their concerns at the loss of the patchy woodland and scrub area. And we recognise the whole site has got temporary TPO. The landscape officers defined this area as being poor quality, but as having potential to provide recreational green space and provide positivity to biodiversity. Part of this area, as we've seen, is included in the proposed site layout, but our view is that the whole of that area should remain under protection, apart from obviously the strip for the highway. Some landscape management is obviously required, but we feel this strip could continue to act as a divider between the north and south elements of the development and to continue to provide established wildlife habitat. The site is obviously a substantial development with 350 homes and will generate a lot of commuting and leisure vehicle movements, exiting on Ewing Road and Hornbeam Road. The Norfolk County Council haven't raised any objections on the highway layout, as both junctions have good geometry and visibility. But our concern is related to the ongoing peak hour congestion that we see on Norwich Road. Queues often back up from the A149 junction, extending south of Millfield Road, making right turns from Hornbeam Road difficult at best and occasionally dangerous. This might be offset by hatching the junction, but I think in reality most peak hour users will exit from Ewing Road for both Norwich and North Horsham bound journeys, which will place a high traffic burden on the residents of Ewing Road. Finally, we'd like to raise the issue of the pedestrian route from Hornbeam Road into town. The narrow footpath beneath the railway bridge is already a hazard. The additional foot traffic that we hope will emanate from this site, together with future traffic from the western development, means that a better solution should be identified here to encourage pedestrian usage rather than vehicles. Thank you. Thank you. Down to you. Please. We have one objecting speaker, Mr. Nigel Lloyd. You know the process. Nigel, to repeat it. Let's go for it.
Okay, I'm not here today to oppose the building of these 350 odd homes. I would like to say a little bit about Hopkins history before I get into the meat of what I've got to say. I have no confidence that the 15% affordable will ever be met based on their local recent history on this area. Also, TPOs. On phase one of this build, Hopkins destroyed every tree that had a TPO on it, disregarded it totally. So the fact that we've got TPOs means nothing to this company, and I want you to know that. So no, I'm here today to talk about this, what I call a thriving ecosystem that I urge you to challenge on this particular application. The plot of land has been allowed to wild up over the last 30 years or so. It's an island of biodiversity, which is much appreciated by many in the local community, including the town council, local ward members, and indeed our MP, all of which have made representations to protect it, although some of these have not been included in the officer's report today. I note that the flooding appraisal has not yet been received for consideration. When I was ward member here, I was often called to the site at the bottom of Nursery Drive because of flooding issues, and this really needs addressing before any more concrete goes down. Members should also be aware that before Hopkins attempts to drive away wildlife by clearing areas of the site, lopping trees, lighting fires, and then fencing the whole area off, it was home to a raft of species, some of which are protected, nationally protected. Please note that only after the site had been disturbed and fully fenced off were wildlife appraisals then carried out. The wildlife appraisals included in the papers therefore do not reflect the actual levels of biodiversity that were present. The Office of Landscape and Ecology appraisals of this proposal states that red listed bird species, bats and badgers will be displaced with minimal mitigation. Other species observed but not mentioned include foraging deer, mammals, butterflies, owls, buzzards, foxes, and rich insect population, including bees. Indeed, several hives were evicted when this application first went in several years ago. According to the reports, all this rich biodiversity apparently has insufficient value to warrant protection by NNDC. Now, what chance does wildlife have in North Norfolk if we allow land like this to be destroyed forever? Members should be aware that NNDC has a strong tradition in valuing wildlife. It has a tree and hedgerow policy. It has enhanced biodiversity of maintained area, maintained gardens policy. It has a strong track record of tree planting and recognises the role that trees play in fighting climate change. How can we allow this unnecessary and wanton destruction of a biodiversity-rich area when there are clearly sufficient land, 3.8 hectares, available elsewhere on the plot?
Sorry, Nigel, I'll have to stop you there. All right, we have one supporting speaker, Sir Jonathan Lieberman from Hopkins. Okay, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Jonathan Lieberman. I'm the Head of Planning at Hopkins Homes. A number of personal comments were made there, which we would dispute, but I'll leave that to another day. As you'll be aware, part of the site is adopted in your current local plan, whilst the whole site is allocated in the emerging plan, which is now at an advanced stage, having been submitted for examination. We started pre-application discussions with the council back in late 2021, and since then we've worked closely with your officers to progress a scheme that accords with emerging policy. Before and after submission, we've met with neighbours and the town council, and the scheme before you has evolved positively in response to comments raised by consultees, including members of the public. Key changes include the retention of additional 770 square metres of existing scrubland, inclusion of additional street trees, relocation of play areas, and detailed changes to the design of the homes and the road network. The application is supported by ecology and tree surveys prepared by specialists, and your officers have concluded that subject to conditions, the scheme would have an acceptable impact. Positively, the scheme achieves 14% biodiversity net gain, and this is in excess of the 10% requirement, which is currently not mandatory. The development would provide a total of 343 new houses and bungalows in a range of sizes, all constructed to comply with M42 accessible and adaptable standards. We are committed to building 53 affordable homes. The level of affordable has been tested by the council's independent expert, who's concluded that the scheme is deliverable in accordance with emerging policy. In terms of sustainability, we adopt a fabric first approach, which reduces heat loss from the buildings. In addition, all the homes will be heated by air source heat pumps, so there'll be no gas on site. Electric vehicle charging points will also be provided in line with the latest requirements. Just touching on the other benefits of the scheme, it includes the provision of 7 self-built houses, a new care home, a new improved access to the garden centre, and inclusion of over 4 hectares of open space with new play areas allotments, together with the creation of jobs associated with the construction phase and the care home. In terms of timescales, the site is not affected by nutrient neutrality, and subject to securing permission today, we'd look to commence development in the summer of this year, with first occupations then anticipated in mid-2025. Approval of this application will therefore help the council boost its housing land supply, and furthermore, will demonstrate to the local plan inspector that the whole site, as now proposed for allocation, is deliverable. In summary, we're pleased the scheme comes before you with a positive recommendation, and we hope that you're in a position to support the scheme today. Thank you.
Do I need to move or can I speak from here?
I think you can speak from there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you and good morning, everybody. I will keep this as brief as possible, as I'm sure you're quite sick of hearing from me in recent weeks. I will move through the paper if that's easier for members of the committee, so that it's not a disjointed approach to how I'm going to speak. If you look on page 61 of the pack, page 55 of the report, we can see the contribution to highways is for the junction that meets with the A149. The importance of this section 106 contribution is that we have a very, very well-used skate park at that junction. And unfortunately, on that side of the road, we have no way for pedestrians to cross safely. We've got no buttons to press for a green man. So we frequently have young people running across the road because they want to get to a facility, but highways are slow to approve a way of making that happen. So that is absolutely vital to the safety of our young people in a space that the town has brought together so that they can enjoy that. The next point I wanted to make is if we move to page 64 of the pack, 58 of the report, under 361, I want to pose the question back to the committee. Do you have sufficient information to make an informed decision? Because we are missing some information from some of the consultees, and that is vitally important. If we have information that comes forward that may sway your decision after this application has been approved, I wouldn't want the committee to feel like they have not had the opportunity to make an informed decision, and that's really important to me. The biggest piece that I want to talk about is possibly 362, which is our section 106. And I want to begin by informing the committee that in the parish of North Walsham, 384 households are currently on the housing list. and have a local connection to the parish and directly adjoining parishes. These are households that are part of our community. I live in North Walsham. They are part of my community. Through current or former residents working the parish or close family living in the parish. Over the last 12 months, only 27 affordable lettings have been given in North Walsham. We have a housing crisis in the district. We are aware of that housing crisis, and North Walsham is affected as the largest market town. So the affordable housing, which we're being told is 53, whilst I'm not particularly happy that they back onto a railway line, which is very noisy and very busy, I'm appreciative that we will have housing that our town needs. I would not accept, to the detriment of local residents, that that be the first on the list to be removed should the developer find themselves in any difficulty. And does the developer have a track record for building the homes that our community needs and deserves? You need to reflect on that. With regards to point 8 of 362, where we look at that, the education contribution, I am slightly confused because I am also the local county member for the east of the town, and having within the last 12 months met with the education team at the county council to check that we have enough provision for our young people, I was told it's not a concern. And when the war in Ukraine broke out and we were welcoming Ukrainian families into our community, I had the conversation again that there would be sufficient space for the young people that we were welcoming in our community to be educated. I was told it's not a concern. I am surprised that it has been raised that we have a capacity issue should these development come forward. I am incredibly supportive of the officer's recommendation that we would support the SEND part of the section 106. I lay heavy challenge on what has been said in terms of capacity, and as local member in a county capacity, I'm disappointed that I'm the last to find out, having had the conversation not very long ago. So I'm a little bit frustrated there. Do I have hope in this application that we will solve some of our housing crisis and support some of our families? I absolutely do. I absolutely do. That's not to detract from what colleagues from North Walsham have said about the biodiversity impact, and they are far, looking to my predecessor, he has a far better grip on the biodiversity impact and has worked on this application and supported local residents far longer than I have on this. So I default to him as the expert on this. I'm speaking from my current position as the local member dealing with the housing crisis. Am I confident that am I confident that if this is going to be approved, will we see what we're promised? I'm not. And I can't offer that confidence to the committee.
Yeah, afraid your 5 minutes as welcome member is up. Okay. We've heard conflicting opinions, and I propose that we will now take a approximately 10-minute break before we go into debate, so that we do not interrupt the flow of that debate. I just suggest you might want to think when you're getting a coffee on the key issue, the principle of development, of the design, of the issue around ecology and biodiversity, and on the impact on infrastructure and the proposed S106 agreements, and perhaps focus on those. I would ask now, I'll ask again before we get started, I would prefer that this is a full open debate and that any proposal to approve or to defer is left late into that debate so we can cover all issues rather than somebody deciding to restrict it early on. So if you would bear with me on that request, it would be appreciated. Can we reassemble at 22, please? Are we not? Yes. Everybody there? Having a discussion with Mr. Williams that he'd just like to have a couple of minutes to clarify and to respond to some of the issues raised at the public speakers, and we'll then move swiftly to debate at that point.
Thank you, Chair. So just want to make, I think it's 6 points, having listened to the various representations from speakers there. So firstly, it was interesting from my perspective that there wasn't really much criticism about the principle of development of the land there, or indeed the conclusion we as officers came to about the balance between affordable housing and that primary contribution. Having said that, there were 5 areas I'll just comment on briefly. So firstly was the issue of, have you got enough information, with a couple of consultee comments outstanding. And I'll come back to just briefly repeat my observation that the recommendation is caveated. So if those turn out to be objections, then we wouldn't have authority, if you agree, to issue that permission. It would have to come back here on those objection issues. Secondly, and relates to this Mr. Lloyd's comment about flooding, the LLFA is one of those outstanding people, although I have to say their outstanding issue is not about flooding in the Nursery Drive area. It's about source protection zone related matters predominantly, but that issue will be picked up. Thirdly, there is the issue of confidence on affordable housing, which came out from a number of speakers. Clearly that's not my ultimate judgment call, but there is a viability assessment in this instance which supports that 15%. If you were to ask me, can I absolutely guarantee that that will be what happens at the end of the day? The answer will be no, but that's not about the developer in this instance. That would be true on any such question, because invariably these things change over time, and you've had that discussion on previous applications, but the 106 would be based on 15%, and any variant would need to be applied for, debated and whatever, and it might go up with an uplift clause in place. And ultimately, one I didn't actively mention, but Mr. Wright from the Town Council did, highways in that regard, and primarily not the on-site, but the Norwich Road issues. Councillor Shires also mentioned that point. I can't do much more than reiterate that the County Council have been all over this one from a highways perspective, and are content, subject to conditions and subject to that contribution, which should help improve the main off-site road junction in the locality. And then finally, clearly much of the talk was about the ecology, biodiversity, etc. of that central area. We've got both Mr. Jervis and Ms. Mole here to cover ecology and trees. I'm sure they can cover survey timings, impacts of fence, which trees are important, which aren't, etc., as councillors see fit. My only observation at this point would be to observe that clearly the applicant has been aware of the local interest in the issue, including from the MP, and I'm not meaning this positively or negatively, but has made a conscious decision to stick with the layout as proposed. And our overarching conclusion, whether we've got sympathy with the local representations or not, is we don't feel there's a justification for refusing it on the grounds of need to retain that particular area. But that would be headline comments.
Thank you. I'd remind you before we debate that you're under our standing orders normally allowed to speak once. I'm quite happy to take additional questions though, or members asking for points to be clarified. Read that as you will. Who wishes to go first? Yes, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a good report. I'm concerned about the affordable house, and I'm disappointed that it's only 15%. And I agree with councillor Shires, and if it goes even less, I'd be even more disappointed. I think that's to get through SS2, and I would want to see more than 15%, but I know you said you couldn't guarantee, but I'm very disappointed at that.
I seem to recall that you were not a council at the time, that planning policy, when putting forward the proposal within the emerging local plan currently under examination, did agree 45% in the western part of the district where house values are higher and 15% in the east. And we need to keep that in mind. We are dealing with two aspects of two local plans here. It's how much weight we give to each that needs to be considered. Who's next? Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I do share Councillor MacDonald's concerns. I know 15% is an acceptable baseline, but I think it's the lowest baseline for affordable housing, and it's not clear if this is housing to rent or buy. And in the papers, we also see this is going to reduce further if the applicant has to contribute to primary school education. It doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to suggest that this type of family home are going to be bought by families with primary school age children. And that does concern me that 15% may reduce even further. So I don't know if Mr. Williams has any comments on that.
Can I start by, apologies, Chair, slightly correcting you on what you just said as well. So the adopted policy in the 2008 plan is 45% unless viability shows otherwise. The draft plan, as you said, splits the district effectively into two on a kind of east-west and a bit north-south basis, but there's a plan in the document if you wish to look at it. The eastern half, including North Walsham, is then 15% in that document. The other half is 35% from Cromer across the coastal strip. In this instance, it's kind of a coincidence, I guess, that the viably assessed amount is 15%, which just happens to chime with the draft plan component for North Walsham. I'm going to probably get boring saying I can't guarantee 15% in that guise, but that is what the Section 106 would say. And we have taken the view as officers that it would be better to have 15% of the SEND contribution, but not the primary contribution in this instance, rather than SEND primary and a figure that would be substantially lower than 15%.
Thank you. Could I just ask whether the county can attempt to enforce that somewhat unreasonable demands, which are actually more reflective of their financial position, I think, and a desire to get some money up front for the possibility of North Walsham West?
Can they enforce? No. Can they challenge legally the council? Yes. Could they refuse to sign the Section 106 related to other components? Potentially, but equally from a conversation, admittedly, with the relevant county council officer, they do understand this council's position. They're pleased the recommendation includes the SEND component rather than excludes the SEND component, and they recognise that it is probably less than ideal from their perspective that this ask came in relatively late, or very late, I might argue, in the process. So conceptually they could, but I think it's unlikely, and it would need to be via the legal bit. They don't have the ability to prevent this authority from issuing a planning decision per se.
Thank you. Members find that useful. Yes, Councillor Hankins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the views that have been expressed here this morning on this situation with regard to 15% and the experience that has been presented, would it be possible to say not 15%, let's make this 25%, so in the event that it falls off, it falls back to 15%? I mean, the developer's going to make a great deal of money out of this particular development. And I echo the thoughts of the other councillors that 15% is, and falling below 50% is paltry, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any also wish to comment on that?
At some point, I'll let somebody else say something, I promise, in that, in that, guys, can I just make two observations? One is to actually, apologies, to answer a previous question. So paragraph 225 of the report sets out the split of the types of affordable between rental and shared ownership at 40 rental, 13 shared ownership. In relation to Councillor Hankins's observation, I'm twisting your words here, but can we jack the numbers up to provide a contingency? The basic answer is no. Well, we could try, but Hopkins, I'm not being critical of them in saying this at all, would refuse to sign that, I'm sure, and would point back to the fact that that would make the development unviable unless, consequentially, the affordable housing package that was 900,000 fell to basically nothing, and nothing else would get funded, which as officers we wouldn't recommend. It's slightly unfortunate, for want of a better word, that affordable housing is often the valve that moves at the end of the process rather than the other components, and that's long been the case in planning. I know this authority is keen, and it is reflected in the draft local plan a bit, to put affordable housing more first in the process, or at least earlier in the process. But bluntly, in answer to your question, the answer is no, without consequential impacts elsewhere, which wouldn't be tenable.
Thank you. I have Councillor Netherway and Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. Are we aware of the current situation with regards to available places in the schools, in the areas going to be affected by this development? Because there's been some talk regarding the affordability, but county obviously have a responsibility, and county, as I understand it, are not exactly flush funds at the moment either. So from that perspective, are we simply by taking the approach that that's less important than something else, are we simply putting one enormous problem in the roadblock in a year or three's time?
Thank you. Does any officer have the actual data for school places available currently in North Walsham?
I could look them up because they are online. The issue there, though, is school places available is influenced by how you calculate the capacity of a building. They simplify, but that's kind of true. And at one point, the capacity calculation on the same building was noticeably higher than it is now. That could be recalculated. The second issue I would just observe here is, again, this is very much a draft and further down the system. This council is also proposing a significantly larger development at North Walsham West, which will have significant impacts for education, where there is no doubt that further provision will be required. And from past experience, I suspect that will lead to a rejiggle, for an unofficial term, of some thinking about primary catchment, who goes where, etc., in that area. And if there were to be an issue, catch up would be played at that time. But fundamentally, for me, here, there was a component that there is capacity in the system. The capacity in terms of built form and scale hasn't changed. The way of calculating how many children could fit in it has done. But neither your officers or the applicant, and Appendix 1 summarises this, feel that the case has been made for the primary part of the ask. But the numbers are in the various documentations the county have submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at page 13, and the local councillor, Councillor Birch, has mentioned about the woodland area. I note the officer's report saying it's pretty rubbish what's there already. I get that. And he's suggesting the 20 houses could be moved. My first point is, if the houses could be moved, has this been explored? And secondly, if what is there at the moment is rubbish, wouldn't it be nice if the developer did a tree planting scheme in that area, which would also help with surface flooding? And my last point, as a clarification, I noticed the developers mentioned allotments. I wasn't clear whether the allotments are there already, or are they going to put them in? Thank you.
So the good news is I'm going to hand the central part of that off to people to my right-hand side, Mr. Jervis and Ms. Mole, to comment on the quality. On the other two components you raised, the allotments are proposed rather than existing. Okay, and firstly, couldn't that bit be saved and 20 homes be put somewhere else? I paraphrase, but that's the gist of it. Conceptually, the answer to that is yes, but there are a couple of very big buts here. If you save that area, the logic would be to save it for its ecological, wildlife, tree-related value, and the only places you could logically put other stuff are in the very valuable open space components that are, Mr. Lieberman referred to, that are within the development. So personal view is I think you'd make the overall scheme worse by saving that component because of the knock-on impacts somewhere else. For sites that we have concluded, I appreciate this is a contentious view, doesn't have significant intrinsic value in itself. But Mr. Jervis, Ms. Mole, Mr. Lyon may wish to comment, which isn't to say I couldn't a bit, but they are more expert than me, and I'm getting bored listening to me as well.
Okay. Which one of you would like to respond?
Well, I can certainly make some comments on the quality of the woodland itself. When we look at assessing a woodland area, there are national guidances and standards that we apply. And the area itself is actually quite small. I can't remember the exact area, but when you look at the sort of Forestry Commission standards, it falls right off the lowest area captured for, the quality of size. When we look at the species components, there are a lot of non-native exotic species, which I think we've already mentioned, the Leylandii. And looking back at what that area was previously, having worked quite closely with the nursery, there's quite a lot of fruit tree species in there, which were just nursery stock that were put in there to, propagate from. So you do have some species emerging like elder, thorn, all those scrub species, which are really incredibly important. And I think if anyone's read Wilding, they are the nursery crops that then, the secondary pioneer species, the pioneer species go in, and then the climax vegetation then comes up through it. So we're looking at a long-term maintenance project, a long-term management project to bring it up to, sort of usable public space, which could in theory be done with management, with planting, with all the other things that would be needed. But at the moment, as it stands, the assessment is it's not, as a woodland and a public space, hugely important. And I think that's a distinction to be made.
If I can just add to that, I think the biodiversity value of that would obviously, yes, there is biodiversity value in scrub, for example, is very good for a lot of species, but scrub in itself is not an uncommon habitat type. In the upcoming biodiversity net gain metric, it's of a medium distinctiveness, so it's nowhere near the quality of woodland habitats and ancient woodland habitats, which would be high and very high and in effect irreplaceable. This is something which, giving any length of time, dense scrub is already existing along the railway corridor. It will continue to grow along the railway corridor. It can be grown around the site peripheries if it was managed appropriately. And I think one of the key points about if this area was actually retained is that it would then be an isolated habitat in the middle of this development, and it would be subject to a lot of human disturbance. You can get littering, potentially dog walk disturbance. So the animals which are actually using it at present, unless you isolate it and it becomes, publicly inaccessible still, then the value of having it there is quite limited. In actual fact, the habitats which are being provided around the site periphery, you've got a mixture of habitats there. You can have a mosaic which is going to accommodate a wider range of species. So having open water, for example, with the suds features, you can have grassland. You're still going to have hedgerows bolstered up and reinforced as well. So, you know, looking at the bigger picture, yes, this is a nice little area which has been left and kind of rewilded itself over the last 15, 20 years, perhaps. But in the long term, the overall scheme is likely to provide something which is more beneficial for a wider range of species.
Thank you. What have we got to Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report, Mr. Williams. Something which I thought I might see in the report was some sort of assessment on carbon saving energy measures and making the development more affordable for people who will inhabit it in terms of running their properties expenditure wise more economically. Now, I thought I'd just take a peek at the Hopkins Homes website to look at what they say about environmental awareness. And it's all very encouraging in terms of a public relations exercise. It reads nicely. All the right murmurings are made in it. But then we look at what's on offer here. And we see a reference to, if you're lucky, electric vehicle charging points. You might get a charging point. You might, if you're unlucky, just get an electricity supply to enable a resident to install it at their own cost, I assume. But there's nothing there about photovoltaic panels, air or ground source heat pumps, and any other energy mitigation measures, which are mentioned on the website, but not in the report. So that's a curiosity that I would like our friends from Hopkins Homes who are present here today, and I thank them for that. It's not always the case, particularly when we're dealing with applications in Hope, so it's good to see them here today. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the biodiversity provision. It's 14%, which is welcome, 4% above the new measures which will come in through the Levelling Up Act when it's enabled, which is good. I'm hoping that that will be, or in its audit, it's going to be for 30 years, like it would be under legislation. I assume it is going to be. But I think the developer, the applicant's missing a trick here. The other thing that I did notice on their website was their willingness to support charities, but there is a sort of a geographical bias to that in terms of their Suffolk-based company. I think they're based in Woodbridge. There seems to be a lot of charitable support in Suffolk, but less so in Norfolk. And I know that we have offered a number of sites in this planning authority in Norfolk to them already. And that is a curiosity, because what isn't clear from the website as well, just so that members of the committee know before they move to a decision, is that they're no longer purely a private limited company. They've been acquired by a private equity company called Terra Firma, who are an extremely rich company, a multi-billion pound company, again with very laudable charitable intentions. And I just wonder where the thinking is in terms of the biodiversity provision on the site, that, you know, the developer could have said, for example, you know, we're going to decimate some badger sets because we're going to build all around it in such a way that they could no longer find it comfortable. We're effectively serving a section 21 notice on the badgers, let's be fair. That said, you know, why not make a voluntary contribution to some off-site provision elsewhere for badger sets to be, you know, upgraded to luxury status, a bit like a top-end Hopkins detached property. Why not do that? Why not take the opportunity? I mean, they make noises about engaging with the community, but you know, it's like going through the motions with it. It's like, oh, you know, we've got a tick box. You know, we have to do X, Y, Z, and we'll do it. And it's not really bespoke engagement in terms of how this development will affect North Walsham. And just for the record, and I am a bit of a broken record on this, our 5-year land supply challenge is temporary. I mean, even the government are looking at downgrading it by 1%. And so they should for areas like this that are affected by nutrient neutrality in such a dramatic way and have been for the last, well, it'll be 2 years in March next month. You know, it's temporary. Nutrient neutrality will be dealt with. People should know that we're doing more in Norfolk than other parts of the country because we've formed a special purpose company to offer up mitigation credits. We're very proactive in that regard. That will resolve itself. And when we get our emerging local plan signed off, probably towards the end of the summer, by the inspector who's sitting in the committee room down the corridor dealing with it currently today, our 5-year land supply will look very, very different. So I don't think we necessarily need to rush to justify the number of properties that are on offer, should the consultees who are still to report back be unhappy. We shouldn't be too worried about modifying this scheme if it comes back to committee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you
Very much.
Interesting points, but I would caution you that we are basing our decision today on planning grounds as they exist. We cannot give consideration to website or changing company ownerships. That's not part of the consideration. Though I have sympathy with your potential views on private equity. But,
Okay, just picking up some of the points that have been raised by Councillor Brown. To start with the EV charging points, and you said there's no mention of renewable energy. I think Mr. Lieberman did say in his submission about air source heat pumps on the dwellings, and so there'll be no gas-fired boilers on the site. And I think he did refer to EV charging points for those dwellings. So I think that has given members some clarity on that point.
I have to apologise, Mr. Lyons, if that's the case, for assuming that that wasn't going to be provided as a default.
That's right. It's in. I think it's in the presentation in the suggestions. And just moving on to charitable donations. Obviously, when we're determining planning applications, we couldn't take into account as a material consideration a charitable donation as an applicant may make to whatever sort of charity was relevant. That's not a material planning consideration that you can give weight to, because one might suggest that's almost buying a planning permission, and that's not what this is about. So we couldn't give weight to that. It's a matter of for the developer whether they wanted to make a charitable donation. Obviously, they've heard what you said as member, but that's not something we can give weight to in the planning balance. On the 5-year land supply point, clearly at this moment in time, as Officer Williams has set out, we don't have a 5-year land supply, so we have to apply the tilted balance under paragraph 11D. So we've set out a recommendation on the basis of as an authority not having a 5-year land supply, and you as a committee will have to weigh that in the balance when making your decision. In terms of the badges point, I think Brad and Image have given their sort of statements on biodiversity, so I'll leave it at that.
Russell, can I just chip in 3 points just quickly, and apologies if I didn't mention it or we didn't cover it sufficiently in the report. The applicant did submit an energy strategy statement as part of the documentation. Mr. Lieberman referred to, as Mr. Lyons just said, some of the components within it, such as air source heat pumps. Secondly, Mr. Lyons just picked on two issues I just want to reinforce. So whilst at some point the 5-year housing supply issue might go away for this authority, housing delivery tests don't in that, guys, and potentially because of nutrient neutrality in part, we're not doing overly brilliantly at delivery either at the moment in that regard. So these homes would make a decent component to delivery. And I would go slightly further than Mr. Lyon. Not only can we not take account of any charitable, etc. donations, we can neither seek nor demand them or infer demand off the back of determining a planning application.
Thank you. Councillor Wellington. Microphone.
The queries, one will be coming again at Oxford's but and the other one will be for Professor Connolly, I think. In terms of the affordable housing, and we've had this experience before, as has been referred to, where we've had an amendment come in for changes to it. Are there any situations on this land that you think could potentially arise which would give cause, or, no, can't go into the kitchen, get your glass beer, but you know, there was an element we knew about the contamination on the land, the other previous one made an amendment came in. Is there anything on this land that you think potentially could bring back another amendment to reduction in affordable housing? We've had the viability assessment done, which we said we needed to do as a safety factor as a matter of course. But is there anything there that you potentially think increases the chance of an amendment coming back into a single affordable housing? And then the second point I would like to look at is the mix of the units. I know North Walsham doesn't have the same level of older people that we have on the coast, but it is still a significantly high number. So 3% of the properties being bungalows seems quite a low percentage. I mean, I know on the coast we're looking at sort of 48% now above 65. Sorry. So that seems a bit low. And then we've also got an issue with second homes, and obviously people coming in purchasing these as second homes. Affordable houses are going to be cheaper if they are the smaller size houses. So I'm just wondering whether the full their properties. So does this fit basically with what we know about what we need? Sorry to quote my way through that.
Well, shall I go first and cover the first half as suggested? Headline answer is no, but with caveats. Okay, so no, I am not aware of anything that is likely to make the position worse that would justify a reduction in affordable. Having said that, they've done a shed load of reports on this. They've done a lot of work, all of which is a good thing in principle for that. And you know, I think there is some contaminants suggested in the area of that central part related to the garden centre, perhaps not surprising in that regard, but those are factored in already. Second part, which I think is relevant from my perspective, is Hopkins have a significant amount of experience of developing in that part. They developed the other third of the site effectively, so it would be difficult for them to mount an argument that, oh, we didn't know anything about the area, because bluntly they do. Equally, you know, I can't predict, I'm not sure anybody's very good at it, exactly where the state of the economy will get to in the next 2 or 3 years in terms of either cost perspective or sales perspective. But that's why we're advocating that if we go with this, or if you go with this, there should be some form of uplift clause there that, you know, if the situation were to get better, then the council gets more. If the situation were to get worse, which is possible, then clearly that would be for the applicant to come back to us if they wished, doesn't mean they have to wish, and make that case at that point in time. But headline answer, no, not aware of any curveballs hidden there. But Mr. Connolly, I suspect, will comment on the other part.
Your query was really about the mix. You mentioned older people. We would have supplied a mix based on housing need at the time. It changes gradually, but primarily most need is for smaller homes for single people and couples. But there's also need for family homes. This site, the affordable housing, will include some 4-bed homes. The amount of need for 4-bed is quite small, but the supply is tiny. In a good year, we might get one new 4-bed home to let. So I've got a note, 6 on this site, so that's going to be a godsend. All of the homes are built to M42, which means they're accessible and adaptable. And some of them will be for M43 wheelchair users. So I would say as an officer, I'd like more, but what they're providing is good in terms of the mix and in terms of accessibility for people with mobility issues, good range of property sizes. So I'd like more, but what there is good.
Thank you. A couple of questions there, which I think might be better addressed to Mr. Lieberman. Could you come back to the front, please? Yep, microphone. Right, just picking up this issue that was raised about any issues on contamination that might change the viability. Are you aware of any contamination on the site that could potentially give rise to that risk?
Again, reiterating what Mr. Williams has said, effectively we have put in a number of surveys that have looked at the contamination, and that has been factored into the viability. So no. There will be further studies that will be undertaken, phase 2 studies, for example, but as we sit here and now, no, that has all been looked at and it's been assessed by your officers.
Thank you. My concern there that it has been raised by local people in the area that there might be potential asbestos contamination from the former greenhouses. I presume you've taken into account.
Yeah, again, the initial surveys have picked up, and yeah, there will be further work required in terms of what remediation is needed, but yeah, we are aware of the contamination that exists.
Thank you. Second question, again, following on from the Willington and others. What level of guarantee are you able to give the committee that we will get the 15% affordables? And we won't have the situation we've had previously with your company in Holt. I think members need some assurance on that, as do the public watching.
The application has always been progressed on the basis of 15%. All of our discussions with officers is on the basis of 15%. The scheme has been designed to accord with 15% in terms of the mix, in terms of our detailed discussions with the housing officer. The viability has been submitted, and that's been, as I said, reviewed by your expert on the basis that 15% is deliverable. It is our intention to deliver 15%. I think previous sites, there were site-specific issues. As a company, we have numerous examples where we have delivered clearly in accordance with policy and what was proposed as part of the application. I think in this instance with Holt, if that's what we're referring to, it was a unique site. It was a former scrapyard, and there were very specific issues associated with that. The application, say, is accompanied by a section 106 that will have 15% embedded within it. And if we were to come back, as Mr. Williams pointed out, we would have to go through another application that would be scrutinised by viability experts, and it would be before you to determine. So, yeah, we would be bound by that obligation unless a further application was made to amend it, in which case, you know, the council would have that opportunity. But in answer to your question, it's always been about 15%.
Okay, thank you. Return to the back.
Thank you.
Right, I have councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, can I just ask regarding the heat pumps and the EV charging points, can we actually make that a condition on this application if we are minded to approve this today? I think it's all very well and good talking about the commitment, but I would just like to firm up that aspect and ensure that that is actually a conditioned commitment.
Okay. Williams.
Yes, with a caveat that we're not supposed to, within a planning consent, duplicate what might be required by building regulations as an automatic in that regard. But broadly, the answer to your question is yes, but we just make sure we get the wording legally right to ensure that the outcome is the same, whether it's covered within building regs or within planning.
Okay, that's fantastic. I just feel a bit more comfortable with that approach. I mean, really, we should be aiming for passive housing standards here, but having these aspects will ensure, you know, a good eco standard, but really we should be aiming for higher standards, a passive housing standard. I do just now want to move on to my concerns over the biodiversity and the eco credentials of this site. I mean, it would appear to me that the developers have, up until this point, had total lack of disregard for this area. I think this space does have quite a significant level of biodiversity, the shrubs and for the wildlife as well, which inhabit it. And we should be aiming to protect this space and enhance it. And I'm just concerned about the commitments from the developer. It would appear through various pages of the report that officers have really had to push on these aspects. If we look on 153, page 30 overall of the report, that it was proposed that there would just be 6.23% of tree canopy, which would be a loss from the current standards of 9.16. Officers have really had to chase on that point for the tree canopy to just reach the standards which it currently is for 9.16%. I just don't think that's adequate. I think we should be striving for more here. And on that point of trees, hedging, that biodiversity, again, stated within the report, this application is next to a current Hopkins development, and there's trees, there's hedges there, and most of those are now dead. There has not been a significant maintenance plan. So it just does not fill me with confidence here. And I just think it's woefully inadequate. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask if no, they need to add?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say there have been some tree losses in the adjoining site. We have put up little water me tree tags to try and get some community investment and buy-in to get those trees established. We have had a couple of years of really dry, hot summers. This summer was kinder to younger trees that have gone in, but off the back of 2 very difficult years to get trees established. And that does allude to the fact that actually those first couple of years of maintenance are critical to get that landscaping scheme established. And there are, you know, we are in ongoing correspondence with Hopkins about getting that landscaping scheme back up to standard. A good canopy cover target is around 15 to 20%. And you can see that, you know, where we're looking at iTree surveys across the whole of Great Britain. Norwich has, I think, risen from about 21 to 24%. And so, you know, when you think about 20% canopy cover, what does that feel like? What does it look like? And I think, you know, Norwich is, you know, big urban area where we can see what that feels like on the ground. It's not necessarily taking 20% of the land out of any place, but integrating those trees into streets, into gardens, into public spaces. And really looking at it as a whole. So rather than just taking those parks or green spaces as the only place, but actually people's gardens and encouraging that, you know, planting. But that's not something that we can necessarily do off the back of this. But yeah, it is tricky because when we're looking at 6.23%, how does that pan out in year 5, year 10, year 15, year 20? And of course, those trees will, in theory, grow. So it's a tricky thing to measure.
Thank you. Anything further to add?
No, I just thank the officer for the the clarification, the comments on that. And also I don't believe I thanked the case officer for the fantastic thorough report. It's been great. Thank you.
Just a question for me on the tree issue. Now, clearly Leylandia provide a pretty sterile environment, and presume when we are talking about maintenance and addition of native trees. Is that the case?
Well, we want to see trees that would support nature, and it's not always the case that a native tree is the only tree that will support wildlife and biodiversity. And there are some very obvious trees which, you know, you can see at the moment full of berries, and the reason they're full of berries is because nothing's eaten those berries. But it doesn't mean to say that there are non-native trees that are beneficial to wildlife and biodiversity, and we should be looking at species that can resist these really harsh drought conditions, making sure that we're getting plants that will survive and thrive, and being careful about that species selection, you know, looking at drought tolerant species, for example, but not putting back things that will only just be a green blob in the landscape. They need to have that functionality. So yes, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning again. I have been in this chamber for quite some considerable years, and I don't think I've ever seen such a huge variety of officers in front of me. It's been a really, really thorough investigation. Now, I have a couple of things I would like to make, a couple of comments, if I may. First of all, I have been a little shocked because basically what we are doing this morning is we are only looking at this application on its merits. I just leave people to think about that one. Now, moving on from there, I'm particularly welcoming the open space. Thank you to the countryside officers for coming and helping us out with several things there. Now, there is one thing, and again, I'm probably going against my own advice, that I do have 2 Hopkins developments within my patch, which are absolutely lovely. I think their building standard is superb. The only thing is it's the open space, which I'm very, very welcome with that, but it's the maintenance of that. I know this is not a material planning consideration, but I do hope that officers are listening to make sure that there is a proper maintenance scheme approved and put in straight away, because sometimes the paperwork gets lost. Well, not lost exactly, but takes an awful long time to sort out. And it's difficult for the residents where they've moved into a lovely new development and suddenly the whole place is running wild. So please, can we do that? And other than that, I think absolutely everything has been addressed. I really do. I'm confident that the officers have gone through in every smallest possible detail they can. I am a little disappointed that our lead local flood authority
still to put in a comment. It is Suffolk County Council. I'm aware there are some twin hatters in this room, so if they would like to go back to their council and remind them to respond a little bit more promptly, I think that would be helpful. But nevertheless, I think I am content to go with the officer's recommendation to approve.
Okay, we can stay for that.
That's
Are you-
a formal
yeah,
proposal.
a formal proposal, thank you. I'll come back to you in a minute, Andy. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for an excellent report. I echo the concerns about the loss of the woodland. I'm somewhat convinced by the landscape officer's help and explanation, but I think it's still a sad thing for the community. I'm interested. Some of the mitigation seems quite contrived for biodiversity. I'm thinking about bird feeders in agricultural fields and things like that. Do we know that that's actually going to happen? Because it seems to be quite a lot of the mitigation is very important, but I'd want to make sure it actually happened. I think the provision of open space is low. I know it just about fits, but it seems quite tight, and I echo the maintenance issues. Does the SUDS area count as open space? And are the SUDS actually going to be effective? Because if they're not, then it would be very sad. Could we actually also, this is my final question, look at the location of the affordable housing? Because someone mentioned it was along the railway line. And also there was another question from Anglia Water about the location of dwellings near the treatment plant. And that hasn't been readdressed. And I wonder if some of these houses are going to have somewhat restricted amenity. And I'd just like to see a plan from that point of view. Thank you.
Okay, before I ask Southerners to just comment on other questions, I'll put my hat on as Community Rail Norfolk representative of the council. I know that line very well. I've travelled it since the 60s. There are 2 trains an hour passenger services, about 8 minutes apart in single lines. One goes in, one comes out. The other rail noise is either from the occasional condensate trains, which are scheduled as normally 2 a week, up till 3. The noise issue there is related to the locomotive sitting in the sidings, waiting for its path back to Norwich and onto Ipswich. That could be considered a nuisance. It's that noise rather than passing trains that I think might need some consideration. Modern local are quieter. Unfortunately, the 66 is better than the old 37s that used to do that trip. But it is a possible issue. I don't personally consider it a major issue, but others might. Also,
So I'm just going to deflect, but tell people what I'm about to deflect to. So Mrs. Hutchinson will cover the point about affordable housing location and the treatment plant point you raised, and she'll go first, and then Mr. Jervis may wish to comment on the bird mitigation type biodiversity point you raised. But Mrs. Hutchinson.
Yeah, affordable housing is predominantly along the eastern side where the railway is. So this is one of the concerns that we've got in terms of the environmental health response. So they've looked at that, and it should be appropriate mitigation for any of those houses. There are ordinary housing as well, but the predominance is for the affordable housing on that side of the development. There are some others within the sort of western side of that southern portion as well, but most of them are on the eastern side. In terms of the Anglian Water comment, I think that was an earlier consultation response. Their second one didn't raise that, so they sort of the redesign with the orchard and everything else, I think, as far as I am aware, had resolved that issue for them. So they're not within the cordon sanitaire, shall we say, there's no housing in the cordon sanitaire of the treatment plant, as far as we're understood, and certainly Anglian Water haven't raised an objection.
With regards to the bird mitigation off-site, so I think Mr. Williams has been in discussions with the Norfolk Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, and they act as intermediaries to, so basically a sum would be paid to a farmer via the Norfolk FWAG, and they would ensure that the mitigation was put into fields as close as possible to the site where they've got amenable landowners to carry out that mitigation. So that would be provision of skylark plots, so it's taking some of the arable field out of production, leaving it kind of managed to provide a short vegetation for the skylarks to forage around in. And the so another point I would make is that that is actually kind of a biodiversity enhancement for that field as well. So it's mitigation which can be carried out as part of environmental stewardship schemes in the past, or ZELMs as well, as it is now. But that would all be secured via a Section 106 obligation or by condition to make sure that that was carried out. And that would, in order to be considered mitigation, that would need to be carried out, you know, prior to the arable field being constructed upon, because that then gives skylarks in the area somewhere else to go to. So, you know, it is something which has been used on multiple schemes throughout the county and has been proven to be effective over time.
Are you happy, Councillor Holiday?
Can I just ask, how long does that £10,000 expected to last? Because that was the Section 106 obligation, wasn't it, as far as the bird mitigation?
The bird, I believe, was 30. It was the monitoring bit was 10.
Or the 10, I mean, how long will this process go? Is it indefinite, this skylark mitigation?
Yes, so we will need to come to an agreement, and early discussions are positive with NFWAG, whatever Mr. Jervis referred to there, who have a array of farmers who I'm told are keen to participate in such schemes. And you're right, we clearly need to be ensuring that, you know, it's done and then it's not undone 5 minutes later, kind of thing, to ensure that longevity is in place.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
I just wondered whether, in terms of the noise from the railway line, whether there is scope within the design and layout of the development as presented today to provide additional trees in between the railway line and the houses immediately adjacent as a noise buffer, or if not trees, then some other form of noise bund abatement. And the other query I've got is in respect of management of the common areas, public open space, etc. Is it proposed that a management cost is attributed to each unit through the conveyancing process to feed into a management company? If so, who will be running that? And would there be a proposal to hive off the allotments to the town council, as has happened on the Lovell development in Holt, to disastrous effect? It's a derelict area. It's not even got up and running as allotments. Just a couple of queries, Mr. Chairman.
Can I cover the first half cover the second half, and half duck the second half, if I paraphrase it? So covering the first half, which was noise adjacent to the railway line. So there is already a reasonable degree of enhanced tree planting along that side. The option as to whether there should be some kind of noise bund, barrier, fence, whatever one chooses to call it, has been considered and discussed. The applicant is convinced and has evidence to support that that isn't required, and the design of the houses can mitigate any concerns. And it's those minor, relatively minor, outstanding issues that we just need to bottom out with our environmental health team. But the chair has waxed lyrical about the number of trains using that, and it is predominantly associated with the idling of the freight trains rather than the passenger trains that you and I might sit on from time to time. The second issue about maintenance, so we will, if this gets to approval, attach a normal maintenance related condition to any approval here. Listening to the mood of the room, that might be logical to be more years than sort of the absolute minimum in that regard. So the condition might well be there, could say 10 years, say for sake of argument, which would be at the upper end of any normal expectation. 5 is a bit more normal, to be honest. How the developer seeks to deliver that is up to them. And from past experience elsewhere, not in North Norfolk, I can't imagine it would be radically different. There are invariably 4 ways of doing that. And it doesn't mean any of them are perfect in terms of their outcome. One, the developer continues to retain that land and that interest, unlikely with, I'm not meaning that critically, with a major house builder. Secondly, they try and persuade the local council to take it on. That normally involves some kind of commuted sum. North Norfolk, as I understand, doesn't have a track record of that as an option. Or third and fourth is some kind of management company, one of which is the sort of the big regional national players, and the other of which is some kind of new residents association management company. I have to say, I'm not sure what Hopkins's model is and is thinking in that regard, but the condition would require the maintenance to take place, and it would be the condition against which we'd have to enforce if we felt it wasn't appropriate. How Hopkins deliver on it would predominantly be a matter for them.
So wondering, Mr. Chairman, as we have them in the room, whether there is any indication as of whether they've had any thoughts on this, as we're quite advanced with this application. It's a full application, isn't it?
Are you able to comment, Mr. Lieberman? Okay. Just another comment from me on this noise issue. Indeed, to remember also that the A149 runs parallel to the site anyway, built on the old Yen railway line, paralleled it. So there is more road noise than rail noise. There is no freight trains at night.
I'm not going to show any
all
favouritism, Mr. Chairman, as to noise from either, the railway over the road. Noise is noise. What I said in relation to the railway.
Yeah,
road
noise is
constant. For the avoidance of doubt, let the record show.
Right, so I have 3 members who have yet to speak. I think, Peter, Mr. Fisher, you had your hand up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've come rather late to the party, so most of my questions have been answered. But the site is for 343 houses or whatever the number is. How can we secure and maintain the trees, and at what point will the planting be done in the life of the site being developed? I mean, I'm very aware that we can only plant these trees in the autumn and winter months to try and give them the best chance of life, but there's no good planting them as soon as the bit of road and footpath has been put in and before the houses have been built, because they will be absolutely decimated. I've seen it plenty of times on other sites. So obviously it's going to take a number of months, years for this housing development to be built. At what time will we likely to get the small percentage of biodiversity back into that area?
Well, with the landscape conditions which are put onto the permission, if it was approved, obviously there would be an obligation to do it over a certain period of time. There would be phasing built into that landscape management plan. So it might be that it's normally the first available planting season after a certain trigger point within the process. And part of the reason that we are more and more increasingly insistent on having a minimum 10-year period on replacements is because if they are put in early in the development stage, they, like you say, they can get decimated and need to be replaced. So the condition would be sufficient in terms of enforcing that, but it is then that ongoing enforcement and making sure that the management is taking place, and that's key to any kind of landscaping scheme, really. So hopefully that answers your question.
Just to add to that, I mean, we've had varied experience in terms of open spaces delivered on larger housing estates, and a lot of it boils down to how soil on site is managed. You see on lots of big housing developments, soil piled up, and sometimes that can cause compression of the ground and can affect the drainage function of that site, and also can then lead to complications in how open space is delivered. So we may want to see conditioning how we manage soil on the site, because that can be important for biodiversity and for delivery of open space.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie, do you want to add anything? You haven't spoken yet.
My greatest concern, to be honest with you, is the affordable housing and whether it's going to get developed or delivered or not. I concur with Councillor Shires. I just feel very uncomfortable that it may not, and we are in the middle of a housing crisis which needs to be dealt with, and there isn't one person here who would disagree with me, I very much doubt, and it needs to be addressed one way or another. I know there's no way of putting it hard in stone, but we need some sort of assurances that it's going to get delivered.
I think we've probably gone as far as we can at this stage. Councillor Paxson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, listening very carefully, and it's very finely balanced, but on balance, I'd like to second the proposal.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything else to add? A very full debate. Thank officers for the extensive responses we've had. We've given this far more attention than we often do. We have a proposer, Councillor Fitch-Tillett, seconder, Councillor Patterson, to go with the officer recommendation, which is set out on page 64 and onwards, to approve subject to all the various conditions and final consultations that are needed. And we go to the vote, please, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Beattie,
Or with reservation.
Councillor Brown,
Or
Councillor Fisher,
4.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett, 4, Councillor Hankins, Councillor Heinrich,
4.
Councillor Holiday, Councillor MacDonald,
4.
Councillor Manstini Boyle,
4.
Councillor Neverway,
4.
Councillor Patterson,
4.
Councillor Varley, Councillor Vickers,
Against.
and Councillor Withington. 4. So that is 11 votes for, 2 against, and 1 abstention. The vote is carried for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. The recommendation is approved. It's now up to officers to negotiate the remaining details. Thank you for giving that your full go this morning. We have no other business. There's no private business. Meeting is therefore closed at 11.